Hail Internet! It's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. But before we get to today's topic, had a couple of little points of interest. One is that the Amazon series is wrapping up filming for season 1 apparently in August. So that's a long time coming, but better late than never. So bring on season 1. The other thing I wanted to share is this awesome comment I got from one of my older videos. Video in question is about Malbeth the Seer. Feel free to watch that video for more info. But briefly, Malbeth is one of the few humans gifted with the power of prophecy. And we see Malbeth's prophecy about Aragorn and the Paths of the Dead in The Lord of the Rings. Well, recently I got an enlightening comment on that video from viewer Mariel McEwen. I asked her if I could read her comment on this video. She said that was fine. So Mariel wrote, "A short bit of family history. Tolkien was my grandfather Lawrence Fawcett's tutor at Oxford after World War I. My mother, Mariel Fawcett McEwen's full name was Mariel Elizabeth, and she was called Malbeth as a child. Tolkien collected names he liked, and my mother became Malbeth the Seer." What? How cool is that? So we get some inside knowledge about the inspiration for Malbeth's name. Thanks so much, Mariel. Think of her grandfather. Yeah, had a tutor in college. Turned out to be one of the greatest authors of the 20th century. Named one of his characters after my daughter. Anyway, how was your day? It's amazing stuff. That's awesome. So thank you again. Okay, on to today's topic, Galadriel. Of all the topics suggested, Galadriel has been the most requested by far. Jason Meekins, Julian Koenig, M.O., Penos Verlaris, and Priscilla Chung Hacker, just to name a few, the folks who have suggested a video about the Lady of the Wood. So just to be honest, it's a bit intimidating covering Galadriel. She's one of a handful of characters who influenced the mythology in the Years of the Trees, the First Age, the Second Age, and the Third Age. Thousands of years of history. But for that reason, she's also incredibly important. So let's do this. Okay, I don't think there's any way to do her story justice in a single video. So this is going to be part 1, the early years. We'll take her story through the Years of the Trees and into the First Age. Something that'll be helpful up front is to do a quick summary of the awakening of the elves. I've done a video on this if you want to get a more in-depth discussion, but briefly, long before Galadriel is born, the first elves awaken in Middle-earth. One of the Valar, Orome, finds them and invites them to the west. Come, experience paradise. Well, the elves have already had a few run-ins with Melkor, and they're justifiably suspicious of this offer. So Orome suggests that 3 of the leaders come with him to take a tour of Valinor, a test drive. Then they can come back and report whether the place is legit. So the 3 leaders who go to the west to see the light of the trees are Finwë, Ingwë, and Elwë. They are suitably impressed by their new potential home, so they each urge their respective clans to head west. Finwë is the king of the Noldor elves, and he becomes Galadriel's grandfather. Ingwë is king of the Vanyar elves. He's arguably the most powerful elf we never really hear about. And a close family member, likely his niece, Indis, becomes Galadriel's grandmother when she marries Finwë. And Elwë, the third elf who got to take a tour of Valinor, sets off on the journey west with his brother, Olwë, and the Teleri elves. Along the journey, Elwë runs into Melian, a powerful Maya spirit journeying through Middle-earth. And when they meet, they become frozen in place for years, while Elwë's people try to find him. Meanwhile, brother Olwë successfully leads part of the clan to the west. Elwë eventually unfreezes, marries Melian, and decides to stay in Middle-earth along with the members of the Teleri that stayed to look for him. I'm simplifying this, but you get the idea. They become the Sindar elves, and Elwë becomes known as Thingol. Olwe's daughter, Eärwen, becomes Galadriel's mother. So, through Finwë, Ingwë, and Olwë, Galadriel is a unification of these three elven clans. Two of her grandfathers are elven kings, and she has a fairly direct line to a third. And as events unfold, it will become important to remember that Thingol is Olwe's brother. So, if someone attacks Olwë, spoiler alert, Olwë and his people get attacked, his brother, Thingol, might take offense. Okay. There's actually a passage from the Fellowship of the Ring that relates back to Galadriel's early years. I remember when I read this for the first time thinking, what is this talking about? It's describing events that occurred thousands of years before the War of the Ring. The scene is depicted in the film, but the dialogue is not. It's the scene in which the Fellowship leaves Lothlorien by boat. Galadriel watches from the shore and says farewell. This is from the Fellowship of the Ring, Book 2, Chapter 8, Farewell to Lorien. On the green bank, the Lady Galadriel stood alone and silent. As they passed her, they turned, and their eyes watched her slowly floating away from them. For so it seemed to them, Lorien was slipping backward, like a bright ship masted with enchanted trees, sailing on to forgotten shores, while they sat helpless upon the margin of the gray and leafless world. Even as they gazed, the silver load passed out into the currents of the great river, and their boats turned and began to speed southward. Soon the white form of the lady was small and distant. Then it seemed to Frodo that she lifted her arms in a final farewell, and far but piercing clear on the following wind came the sound of her voice singing. But now she sang in the ancient tongue of the elves beyond the sea, and he did not understand the words. Fair was the music, but it did not comfort him. Yet, as is the way of elvish words, they remained graven in his memory, and long afterwards he interpreted them as well as he could. The language was that of elven song, and spoke of things little known on Middle-earth. Ah, like gold fall the leaves in the wind, long years numberless as the wings of trees. The years have passed like swift draughts of the sweet mead in lofty halls beyond the west, beneath the blue vaults of Varda, wherein the stars tremble in the song of her voice, holy and queenly. Who now shall refill the cup for me? For now the kindler, Varda, the queen of stars from Mount Everwhite, has uplifted her hands like clouds, and all paths are drowned deep in shadow. And out of a gray country darkness lies on the foaming waves between us, and mist covers the jewels of Calasyria forever. Now lost to those from the east is Valimar. Farewell. Maybe thou shalt find Valimar. Maybe even thou shalt find it. Farewell. Suddenly the river swept round a bend, and the banks rose upon either side, and the light of Lorien was hidden. To that fair land Frodo never came again. Galadriel's Lament, Namarie. It's the elven word for farewell. Fun trivia fact. Led Zeppelin's song Ramble On, which mentions Gollum and Mordor in the lyrics, opens with the line, "Leaves are falling all around." This is an homage to the first line of Galadriel's Lament, "Like gold fall the leaves in the wind." So, Led Zeppelin, major Tolkien fans. This is a really powerful scene. As the Fellowship sails away, Galadriel is moved to song. And the lyrics talk about her regret. We'll get into the choices she made along the way that lead to this song. But here she is comparing herself to Varda, queen of the Valar, and revered by the elves. Varda lives in the Undying Lands in paradise, celebrating the years, having her cup filled with sweet mead. Meanwhile, Galadriel feels the weight of the years in Middle-earth and asks, "Who now shall refill the cup for me?" And at this point in the story, Galadriel's convinced that she will never be allowed to return to the West. We'll cover how that exile gets lifted in another video, but at this moment, she's feeling the loss and the scope of that banishment. And I think she's lamenting the irony of Varda, this being she reveres and adores, shutting her out of Aman. Varda has uplifted her hands like clouds, and all paths are drowned deep in shadow. Interesting note, the line, "and mist covers the jewels of Calasyria forever," refers to a pass through the impossibly high Pelori Mountains in Aman. The pass was called the Cleft of Light, Calasyria, and its purpose was to allow the light of the trees of Valinor to be seen on the eastern shore of Aman and on the island of Tol Eressëa. Without the Cleft of Light, the mountains would have blocked the light of the trees. So this is a way for the Valar to communicate with the elves living in eastern Aman. So I'm guessing the jewels embedded in the sides of the cliffs of Calasyria help to refract and spread the light of the trees. By saying that Varda has put a mist over the jewels of Calasyria, Galadriel's saying that the Valar have shut themselves off from the east. And the particularly moving part of this song is right at the end, when Galadriel sings, "Maybe thou shalt find Valimar. Maybe even thou shalt find it. Farewell." Tolkien writes about this moment in one of his letters. And when he says exiles, he's referring to the Noldor elves, one of which would be Galadriel. The exiles were allowed to return, save for a few chief actors in the rebellion, of whom at the time of the Lord of the Rings, only Galadriel remained. At the time of her lament in Lorien, she believed this to be perennial, as long as earth endured. Hence, she concludes her lament with a wish or prayer that Frodo may, as a special grace, be granted a sojourn to Eressëa, the solitary isle in sight of Aman, though for her, the way is closed. That's just really touching. At the moment that she's reliving these painful memories, she has enough empathy for Frodo that instead of being consumed by self-pity, she sends out a prayer for Frodo. And as we know, Frodo does indeed go to the west. So now, let's leap back to the years of the trees to see the inspiration for Galadriel's Third Age lamentation. Remember, I mentioned King Finwë, Galadriel's grandfather. There's a few quotes I'm going to read that I also read in my Feanor videos, but they're important to know Galadriel as well. As you'll see, her story and her Uncle Feanor's story are interwoven. Galadriel's father is Feanor's half-brother, Finarfin. This is from the Silmarillion, Chapter 5. Finwë was king of the Noldor. The sons of Finwë were Feanor and Fingolfin and Finarfin. But the mother of Feanor was Miriel Serinde, whereas the mother of Fingolfin and Finarfin was Indis of the Vanyar. Feanor was the mightiest in skill of word and of hand, more learned than his brothers. His spirit burned as a flame. Fingolfin was the strongest, the most steadfast, and the most valiant. Finarfin was the fairest, and the most wise of heart, and afterwards he was a friend of the sons of Olwë, lord of the Teleri, and had to wife Eärwen, the swan maiden of Aquilande, Olwë's daughter. So we see that Finarfin is the wisest of the sons of Finwë, and he certainly passes that wisdom on to his daughter, Galadriel. And we get this definitive statement from Tolkien placing Galadriel and Feanor at the top of the pantheon of elves. This is from Unfinished Tales, The History of Galadriel and Celeborn. Galadriel was the greatest of the Noldor, except Feanor maybe, though she was wiser than he, and her wisdom increased with the long years. Her mother name was Nerwin, and she grew to be tall beyond the measure even of the women of the Noldor. She was strong of body, mind, and will, a match for both the lore masters and the athletes of the Eldar in the days of their youth. Even among the Eldar, she was accounted beautiful, and her hair was held a marvel unmatched. It was golden like the hair of her father and of her foremother Indus, but richer and more radiant, for its gold was touched by some memory of the star-like silver of her mother. And the Eldar said that the light of the two trees, Laurelin and Telperion, had been snared in her tresses. Many thought that this saying first gave to Feanor the thought of imprisoning and blending the light of the trees that later took shape in his hands as the Silmarils. For Feanor beheld the hair of Galadriel with wonder and delight. He begged 3 times for a tress, but Galadriel would not give him even 1 hair. These 2 kinsfolk, the greatest of the Eldar of Valinor, were unfriends forever. Creepy Uncle Feanor seemed to have an obsession with Galadriel's hair. These 2 greatest of the Noldor will be at odds going forward, and it'll be important in weighing Galadriel's culpability in the events to come. There's another good quote about her opposition to Feanor, which shows that she's going to have to struggle against going the way of Feanor. This is from the same chapter of Unfinished Tales. From her earliest years, she had a marvelous gift of insight into the minds of others, but judged them with mercy and understanding. And she withheld her goodwill from none, save only Feanor. In him she perceived a darkness that she hated and feared, though she did not perceive that the shadow of the same evil had fallen upon the minds of all the Noldor, and upon her own. That's going to be a lifetime struggle for her, as we see in that lament of hers thousands of years later during the War of the Ring. Galadriel is Finarfin's only daughter. The most notable of her brothers is Finrod. I've done a video about him as well, another wise and noble elf. As brother and sister, Galadriel and Finrod exemplify the best traits of elven kind. And I'll note, in that previous quote, it mentions Galadriel's physical prowess. She's tall and athletic. That's backed up by this quote from one of Tolkien's letters. Galadriel, like all the other names of elvish persons in The Lord of the Rings, is an invention of my own. It is in Sindarin form and means maiden crowned with gleaming hair. It is a secondary name given to her in her youth in the far past, because she had long hair which glistened like gold, but was also shot with silver. She was then of Amazon disposition, and bound up her hair as a crown when taking part in athletic feats. So he describes her as having an Amazon disposition, and binding up her hair so that it won't get in her way during athletic feats. This is a quality of hers that we don't see on display in The Lord of the Rings, but she is a force to be reckoned with. And we'll see a note from Tolkien later that describes her on the battlefield. So let's turn to one of the most pivotal moments in Tolkien's mythology, the Oath of Feanor and his sons. The oath that sends the Noldor off to Middle-earth to reclaim the stolen Silmarils from Morgoth. All the important Noldor are present for this very public oath, including Galadriel and her family. This is from the Silmarillion, Chapter 9. Fingolfin and Turgon his son therefore spoke against Feanor, and fierce words awoke, so that once again wrath came near to the edge of swords. But Finarfin spoke softly, as was his wont, and sought to calm the Noldor, persuading them to pause and ponder, ere deeds were done that could not be undone. Finrod was with Turgon his friend, but Galadriel, the only woman of the Noldor to stand that day, tall and valiant among the contending princes, was eager to be gone. No oaths, she swore, but the words of Feanor concerning Middle-earth had kindled in her heart, for she yearned to see the wide, unguarded lands and to rule there a realm at her own will. That last sentence is very revealing. No oaths, she swore, so she didn't fall into the trap of Feanor's sons. But the words of Feanor concerning Middle-earth had kindled in her heart, for she yearned to see the wide, unguarded lands and to rule there a realm at her own will. And of course, that's exactly what she does. It seems she has this ambition and this yearning to explore that puts her at odds even with her own father. Finarfin is saying, hey, let's all take a breath here before we do something stupid. But Galadriel is ready to head to Middle-earth. What happens next is the something stupid that Finarfin was trying to avoid. We get the event that dooms the Noldor, the unforgivable first kinslaying. Feanor knows that he needs boats to cross the sea. Well, you know who has those boats? In fact, the best boats? King Olwe and his Teleri elves in Aqualande. Feanor demands the boats. Olwe refuses, so Feanor takes them by force, and many elves get killed in the process. And remember, Olwe's daughter is Galadriel's mom. We get a glimpse of Galadriel's part in this battle and her Amazon qualities in this passage from the Unfinished Tales. Even after the merciless assault upon the Teleri, though she fought fiercely against Feanor in defense of her mother's kin, she did not turn back. Her pride was unwilling to return, a defeated suppliant for pardon. But now she burned with desire to follow Feanor with her anger to whatever lands he might come, and to thwart him in all ways that she could. So she fights fiercely on the side of the Teleri against her own clan, the Noldor. She probably knows some of the elves that she's fighting. Shortly after, the Vala Mandos, or one of his emissaries, appears and delivers the dreaded Doom of Mandos. The kinslaying crossed a moral line, and now Feanor and all who follow him are exiled and fated to meet unhappy ends. Interestingly, at this moment, Finarfin, Galadriel's dad, blessed with wisdom, repents and turns back, at least partially because Feanor just attacked, killed, and stole from his wife's people. And several elves follow Finarfin back to Valinor, where they receive a pardon. But none of Finarfin's kids go with him, including Galadriel. And that had to have been an awkward, tension-filled moment, seeing her father turn back, knowing on some level with her wisdom that it's the right thing to do, but choosing to keep following Feanor instead. As the previous quote said, Galadriel follows Feanor to thwart him in all ways that she could. Feanor immediately screws over his brother Fingolfin and anyone not in the Feanor camp by secretly sailing across the sea during the night, leaving the bulk of the Noldor behind, then burning the ships so that they can't be sent back for the others. This offers another chance for Fingolfin and for Galadriel to follow in Finarfin's footsteps and simply turn back. But they just can't do it. This is from the Silmarillion, Chapter 9, Flight of the Noldor. Then Fingolfin, seeing that Feanor had left him to perish in Ahriman, or return in shame to Valinor, was filled with bitterness. But he desired now, as never before, to come by some way to Middle-earth and meet Feanor again. And he and his host wandered long in misery, but their valor and endurance grew with hardship, for they were a mighty people, the elder children undying of Eru Ilúvatar, but new come from the blessed realm, and not yet weary with the weariness of earth. The fire of their hearts was young, and led by Fingolfin and his sons, and by Finrod and Galadriel, they dared to pass into the bitterest north, and finding no other way, they endured at last the terror of the Helcaraxë and the cruel hills of ice. Few of the deeds of the Noldor thereafter surpassed that desperate crossing in hardihood or woe. There Elenwe, the wife of Turgon, was lost, and many others perished also. And it was with a lessened host that Fingolfin set foot at last upon the outer lands. Small love for Feanor or his sons had those that marched at last behind him, and blew their trumpets in Middle-earth at the first rising of the moon. So Galadriel is one of the leaders of this group that decides to brave the Helcaraxë, the grinding ice, rather than turn back. Time is measured a bit differently during the years of the trees, but it takes about 10 years to cross this deadly wasteland. And as Tolkien writes, few of the deeds of the Noldor thereafter surpassed that desperate crossing in hardihood or woe. It's a major undertaking. Just surviving the trip and enduring those conditions for that long would have a lasting effect on Galadriel's outlook on life and her ability to face adversity. Those 10 years or so are perhaps the worst 10 years of her life. But the survivors finally arrive in Middle-earth, looking for revenge on Feanor, as the moon first rises in the sky. We're entering the First Age. Little did they know that Feanor had already been slain in battle by Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs. I wonder if Fingolfin and Galadriel had had their own Malbeth the Seer, someone to write a poem telling them that Feanor would be dead by the time they reached Middle-earth. Would they have made the journey? Confronting Feanor was certainly a motivating factor for the decision to brave the Helcaraxë. But I suppose the legacy of Feanor, his oath-swearing sons, would have still given them the reason to march on. So now it's the First Age. The Noldor have arrived in Middle-earth, and Galadriel and her brother Finrod go visit great-uncle Thingol at his place. This is from the Silmarillion, chapter 13. Now on a time, Finrod and Galadriel his sister were the guests of Thingol, their kinsman, in Doriath. Then Finrod was filled with wonder at the strength and majesty of Menegroth, and it came into his heart that he would build wide halls behind ever-guarded gates in some deep and secret place beneath the hills. Therefore he opened his heart to Thingol, telling him of his dreams, and Thingol spoke to him of the deep gorge of the river Narog. And when he departed, he gave him guides to lead him to that place, of which few yet knew. Galadriel, his sister, went not with him to Nargothrond, for in Doriath dwelt Celeborn, kinsman of Thingol, and there was great love between them. Therefore she remained in the hidden kingdom and abode with Melian, and of her learned great lore and wisdom concerning Middle-earth. This trip to Doriath is obviously very important for our heroic siblings. For Finrod, it leads to the creation of his realm of Nargothrond. And for Galadriel, it's where she meets the love of her life, Celeborn. Celeborn is a Sindar elf living in Doriath, so he's never been to the west. The last sentence of that quote is also important for Galadriel. Therefore she remained in the hidden kingdom and abode with Melian, and of her learned great lore and wisdom concerning Middle-earth. Melian, as we mentioned before, is a powerful Maya spirit, and she becomes Galadriel's teacher. There are a few better teachers, if any, available in Middle-earth at this time. So this is going to aid the already wise Galadriel, allowing her to succeed in the coming ages of Middle-earth. Though in my Part 2 video, we'll learn that the flow of knowledge is a two-way street, and Melian learns a lot from Galadriel about what really happened with Feanor and the Noldor. Info the Noldor would rather keep secret, frankly, due to the shame of it. But let's end Part 1 with a little discussion on Galadriel and Celeborn, one of the longest-lasting relationships in Tolkien's mythology. In Unfinished Tales, Christopher Tolkien has this to say about the couple. This is also from The History of Galadriel and Celeborn. There is no part of the history of Middle-earth more full of problems than the story of Galadriel and Celeborn. And it must be admitted that there are severe inconsistencies embedded in the traditions. Or, to look at the matter from another point of view, that the role and importance of Galadriel only emerged slowly, and that her story underwent continual refashionings. Now that's quite a statement. And the line that strikes me most is, the role and importance of Galadriel only emerged slowly. So we get the idea that as he wrote, Tolkien gave more and more storylines and more agency to the character of Galadriel. It seems he also tried to make her more and more blameless in the actions of the Noldor as time went on, ending with this fascinating revision written near the end of his life. This is from the same chapter of the Unfinished Tales. A wholly different story of Galadriel's conduct at the time of the rebellion of the Noldor appears in a very late and partly illegible note. The last writing of my father's on the subject of Galadriel and Celeborn, and probably the last on Middle-earth and Valinor, set down in the last month of his life. In this he emphasized the commanding stature of Galadriel already in Valinor, the equal if unlike in endowments of Feanor. And it is said here that far from joining in Feanor's revolt, she was in every way opposed to him. She did indeed wish to depart from Valinor and go into the wide world of Middle-earth for the exercise of her talents. For, being brilliant in mind and swift in action, she had early absorbed all of what she was capable of the teaching which the Valar thought fit to give the Eldar, and she felt confined in the tutelage of Aman. This desire of Galadriel's was, it seems, known to Manwë, and he had not forbidden her, but nor had she been given formal leave to depart. Pondering what she might do, Galadriel's thoughts turned to the ships of the Teleri, and she went for a while to dwell with her mother's kindred in Aqualande. There she met Celeborn, who is here again a Teleran prince, the grandson of Olwe of Aqualande, and thus her close kinsman. Together they planned to build a ship and sail it to Middle-earth, and they were about to seek leave from the Valar for their venture when Melkor fled from Valmar and, returning with Ungoliant, destroyed the light of the trees. In Feanor's revolt that followed the darkening of Valinor, Galadriel had no part. Indeed, she with Celeborn fought heroically in defense of Aqualande against the assault of the Noldor, and Celeborn's ship was saved from them. Galadriel, despairing now of Valinor and horrified by the violence and cruelty of Feanor, set sail into the darkness without waiting for Manwë's leave, which would undoubtedly have been withheld in that hour, however legitimate her desire in itself. It was thus that she came under the ban set upon all departure, and Valinor was shut against her return. But together with Celeborn she reached Middle-earth somewhat sooner than Feanor, and sailed into the haven where Círdan was lord. There they were welcomed with joy, as being of the kin of Elwë Thingol. So this is a radically different telling of Galadriel's story. Just to confirm, this isn't canon, but it does give us a look at Tolkien's change of heart regarding Galadriel. Here, she decides to head to Middle-earth independent of Feanor's revolt. Celeborn is a Teleri elf living in Aqualande, as opposed to a Sindar elf living in Middle-earth. And together they build a boat that takes them across the sea. They fight together on the side of the Teleri against Feanor, and so they have no guilt, and would not be caught up in the doom of Mandos at all. She just has the misfortune of sailing to Middle-earth right when the ban on travel gets imposed, so she can't return. I prefer the canonical Galadriel, a character that strives to do the right thing and usually succeeds, but has genuine conflicting emotions and regrets. Though, I like reading this late retcon of Galadriel because I think it shows that Tolkien had genuine affection for this character and her place in the mythology. In part 2, we'll pick up right where we left off, with Galadriel and Celeborn in Doriath, while the world hurtles toward the War of Wrath. So thanks to everyone who suggested this topic. The research has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.